Welcome again to Joe Stunner Boxing. So the dust is settling on the 5 versus 5, and I thought it was a tremendous night's boxing. Just really, really enjoyable. Some really great matchups. We had some stoppages. We had some great skills on display. Close fights. I don't think you can really knock this card. It was just tremendous for boxing, I think. And I mean, I wasn't Matchroom or Queensberry. I wasn't in favour of either. I just wanted to see some good fights, and I got that. And how telling is it that the one fight that originally, one of the guys who originally was going to be the centrepiece of the whole event, which was Dmitry Bivol, his fight was, although it was a very good performance, and he got his first stoppage in 10 fights, he kind of slipped under the radar. A lot of the people were more interested in the Queensberry versus Matchroom setup. But there's one thing that bears mentioning with regard to this whole thing, and that is, let's talk about Frank Warren. Because if you go back, let's say over a decade, 12 years maybe, a little bit long, I don't know, roughly a little bit more than a decade, you'll remember that Frank Warren was pretty much considered yesterday's news. Okay, he was struggling with Box Nation, struggling because if you've seen Frank interviewed, you'll know that the concept was, it was a new concept. There'd never been a boxing channel specifically, well, just for boxing. There'd be sports channels, obviously, but not one devoted entirely to boxing. And the funding was problematic because one of the major investors in Box Nation pretty much at the 11th hour pulled out. I think it was a Russian investor. Frank's talked about this in interviews. Meanwhile, over at Sky, Eddie Hearn was getting an exclusive deal, and not only, it wasn't only getting his dad's wallet, which is a pretty big wallet. He was getting Sky's money to basically build a little Sky stroke Matchroom boxing empire, which he subsequently did. I mean, he did it brilliantly. Eddie was very inexperienced boxing promoter. His first endeavour was with Audley Harrison against David Hay. But he built that. He built, having been pretty much humiliated because of his involvement with David Hay, he got this deal with Sky and he absolutely flew. And he, as they say, he turned the silver spoon into a gold one. So you've got one guy who's younger, who's quite charismatic, who understands this sort of burgeoning social media scene, and you've got another guy who's 60 or whatever he was at the time, Frank, who's pretty much looks like a dinosaur. And if you look at even the production values of Box Nation were very sort of low level, whereas with Sky it was all bells and whistles and fireworks and whatever, dancing rah-rah girls. It looked like, Eddie was absolutely flying and Frank was struggling very, very badly. And if you looked at Company's house, you'd see the state that Matchroom was in compared to the state that Queensberry were in, and it was chalk and cheese. But there's one thing that Frank has over Eddie that I think is, well, actually I can think of a couple of things that are connected. And that is that Frank comes from a similar background to Eddie's father, Barry Hearn. He started from the floorboards up. He started with nothing. And he gradually built his empire. Wheeling and dealing and sort of getting on with things despite the ups and the downs, and very considerable downs as well as the ups. In other words, he knows how to survive. He knows how to suffer those real hard hits and come back. And when I say suffer those hard hits, of course, I'm not forgetting that once upon a time he was shot and lost one of his lungs. And then within, I think it was 12 days of being shot, he was out and wheeling and dealing again. This guy is a very, very mentally tough man. mentally tough, because he's kind of seen it all. And the other thing, or the connected thing that Frank had over Eddie, was the fact that he just doesn't give up. He's got all that experience over decades, which Eddie didn't have. Now, I've got to be honest, I was thinking, well, is Frank finished? Has his day been and gone? But the one thing, and perhaps another thing that Frank can match, which is a considerable asset to have, is that he can match Eddie Hearn in the work ethic stakes, because both these guys work like Trojans. I mean, when Eddie ever sees his family, I do not know. He's in a different country virtually every day. Frank, being an older man, he's got, grown-up kids. Eddie's kids are still, they're teenagers or young teenagers. So they're at different points of their career, but no doubt Eddie Hearn is this obsessive workaholic. Whereas Frank, now that he's got adult kids, they can support him, they can work with him. His sons George and Francis are very involved in Queensberry. I think George is the CEO of Queensberry. So Frank, even though I think he's about, is he 70, 71 now? He's got that family support. Now, I'm sure Eddie has as well, because Barry Hearn is always going to be there if Eddie needs to pick his brains. And you always want your kids to do better than you. But at the same time, even though they are doing better, again, there is no substitute for experience. And so Frank, with all that experience, he knew 10, 12, 15 years ago, he knew he could ride out the storm. He knew he could wheel and deal. He knew what he was capable of. And so when it looked as if Eddie was up in the heavens and Frank was still, a pedestrian walking on the pavement, he must have known, I'd get through this, no problem. And if you look at certain interviews going back maybe 10 years or whatever, Frank said, we just go to work. We just do our thing, Someone who has that irrepressible, almost indestructible desire to just take one day at a time, 1 week at a time, 1 month at a time, and gradually build, who never seems to sort of look up at the mountain, but instead walks a few feet up until they need maybe a little rest, then they walk up a bit more. Someone who does that, who has that mentality in life, is pretty much destined to achieve, to maximize their potential. And whereas Eddie was on a mission because it was all new to him, Frank knew he could come back, and he has come back. He's come back incredibly. I mean, for Queensberry to beat Matchroom 5-0, 10 points to 0, I think that's got to be up there in Frank Warren's career. It's got to be. I can't. I mean, he's put on some incredible stadium shows and shows in America and so on and so forth. And now the whole Saudi thing, of course, he was very, very instrumental in bringing that into the foreground. And Matchroom, they'd done shows with the Saudis before, the AJ rematch with Andy Ruiz. But again, Frank, irrepressible, even in his 70s. And if you go back, I think it's about 5 or 6 years, don't forget it was Frank who suggested to Eddie, let's get together, let's do a Queensberry versus Matchroom thing. This was years ago. And Eddie at the time, had he just moved to the zone? I'm not so sure. I can't remember the exact timeline. But he was like, well, I'd be throwing you a bone. I'd be doing you a favour by doing that because we're up here and you're down here. But it was Frank who was the one who was saying, if you're down here and your stable is supposedly vastly inferior to Matchroom's, you must have some faith in your fighters. And that's another thing that Frank does. He has faith in his fighters. Willie Hutchinson against Craig Richards. That wasn't an easy fight. I thought Richards would win that. A lot of people did. Willie Hutchinson came of age. Talking of coming of age, Hamza Shiraz, 25 years old, lacking in rounds under the belt. Took on Ammo Williams and beat him up and stopped him. Look at Daniel Dubois, less than a year ago, being written off as a force. Oh, he's a quitter. He's quit twice. If you quit once, you'll quit again, you'll quit again. No, he really proved himself against Philip Hergovich, just as he did against Jarrell Miller. All the guys. Nick Ball coming off that, controversial draw in another barn burner of a fight, that little wrecking ball, fireball, whatever you want to call him. Amazing performance against an extremely good fighter in Ray Ford. And then you got Zhilei Zhang. And what did Frank do after Zhang won? He said, well, let's do a show in China. That's the way the man's brain thinks. Constantly looking above, but recognising that without all the hard work, all the self-belief, all the resetting of yourself, your business, the people around you, it's not going to happen unless you do that. You won't have everything now. Nothing's going to be easy. You expect the worst, but you keep working hard. And I think it's a tremendous, just tremendous proof of just how tough and what a survivor Frank Warren is. He was interviewed and he said, "I'm not a survivor." I'm like, well, I don't look at it like that. Well, Frank, I do, to be honest with you, and it's quite amazing. And I'll tell you what as well, Eddie Hearn, as a younger man, will have learned so much by working alongside Frank Warren, because Eddie was always, maximum amount of money, the numbers have got a crunch, blah, 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 blah. Frank, sometimes in business, like Box Nation, didn't make a great deal of money. And Frank's had problems. If you go way, way back to the 90s, he had issues where he was investing in a part of London that was being developed. It didn't work out. He lost millions of pounds. He just came back. It's a tremendous example, really, to anyone. Both these guys, not just Frank Warren, but if you want to talk about work ethic, both these guys have got it in spades. I mean, they're both an example, also to any fighter, just how hard you can work. If you've got a promoter who's working his nuts off, trying to get you opportunities, trying to get you big paydays, if that don't motivate you to work hard in the gym and to really give it your all on the night, I don't think anything will, to be honest with you. And probably your promoter is going to say, well, if I'm working my nuts off, you're not doing anything. No, I'm not interested. I'm going with people who have the right attitude. And in fact, I think that's why Frank made Hamza Shiraz the captain, because he saw that young man who's only 25, such a mature 25, and he thought, I like that, I like the attitude. When you're an older person, you see that in younger people, and it's a very attractive quality because it means this kid's going somewhere, definitely with that attitude. Attitude, when you're younger, you kind of accept, I am what I am, you're unapologetic, perhaps you might be lacking a little bit in diplomacy. When you get older, you learn the nuances of having to deal with people, of having to deal with different psyches. So I think it's a tremendous achievement, actually not just for Frank, but for Matchroom. They got spanked to hell, didn't get a single point on the board. But there'll be other occasions. Now Eddie and Matchroom are going to want their revenge. But also, if you look at the post-fight press conference with the Queensberry guys, the camaraderie was absolutely tremendous. And you need that as well. If you're in business, if you're in it could be a football team, could be a team around you if you're a boxer, could be if you work in an office, if you work in a shop, a factory. If you've got that camaraderie, it makes you want to work harder. It makes you want to do everything, not just for yourself, but for everyone. It was a great show. It was a great, great show. So what do you think? Leave your comments below. Give me your opinions on the whole 5 versus 5 thing. I thought it was tremendous. I hope there's more to come. They're talking about doing a big show at Wembley, which I'm really looking forward to. These big shows just come so quickly, so incredibly quickly. And I've talked to a couple of people, actually, who said similar things, and that is that, it's almost like they're coming so quickly, we can't get up for these big shows because it's just one big show after another. I know Lee from Inside the Distance, I was talking to him about this. He's one of the people that said this. I agree. It is sometimes difficult, but better too much than too little, because one day it will end. All good things end. So let's enjoy it while it's here. Comments below. Please subscribe to the channel if you're new and hit the like button as well. And I'm looking forward to reading your comments. All right, ladies and gentlemen, enjoy your Sunday and I'll catch you later. Bye for now.